This week in wrestling history, we go back 28 years ago. This week, on the January 25th, 1993 episode of Monday Night Raw from the Manhattan Center, taped 1 week prior, on January 18, Ric Flair wrestled his final WWE television match until 2002 in a loser leaves town loss to his former executive consultant, Mr. Perfect. Flair had already lost the loser leaves town match when he wrestled in the Royal Rumble match the following Sunday. Couldn't get away with that today. But back then, they did those sorts of things. This was not Flair's final match. That would come on February 10th in Germany in a loss to then WWF champion Bret Hart. Flair has said that he had an agreement, I think a handshake deal more than any specific clause that may have been put into his contract. I think it was more of a gentleman's agreement with Vince McMahon. That at any point, if Vince did not see him as a main event talent anymore and he was going to phase him down the card, that he would be allowed to leave and go back to WCW. And Vince had come to him and explained that he would be working second and third from the top, and he wanted him to start putting over more of the younger talents, some of the newer stars, and then later on he would transition him over to a front office position. Flair wasn't interested in that. Flair still very much wanted to wrestle and be a featured player. So he gave Flair the opportunity to go to Bill Watts, who had been calling him every day, and he told Flair, look, if you go, I just need you to do a favor for me. And Flair agreed, and that was it. And I assume that favor was losing to Mr. Perfect on his way out. He did not want a reduced role in the company. And I always think, it would have been cool if Flair had stuck around a few more months through WrestleMania 9 and then lost to Perfect there instead. I mean, look, in a lot of ways, this was only 2 or 3 weeks into the very beginning of Monday Night Raw, so being able to, feature a match like that on Raw was probably a big coup for Raw in terms of establishing the new show. But that should have been, if you really think about it, that really should have been a WrestleMania match, especially if that was going to be Flair's big send-off. But it was not meant to be. 3 days after that show aired, on January 28th, 1993, Andre the Giant passed away in his sleep from heart failure at the age of 46 in a hotel in Paris, France. He had been there to attend his father's funeral. His father died on the 15th. He stayed for his mother's birthday, which was on the 24th. And the actual date of his death, and the one listed on his death certificate, according to the Eighth Wonder of the World book on his life, which I'm not done with yet, but they did a tremendous job in terms of all the research for this book, Pat LaPrade and his co-author. The actual date that Andre died, despite whatever Wikipedia may tell you, or WWE for that matter, was January 28th, not the 27th. The last time he was seen alive was after midnight on the morning of the 28th. Before he finally went to bed, it is listed everywhere as the 27th, but that is actually not correct. His ashes were said to have weighed 17 pounds after he was cremated, and they were spread across his ranch in North Carolina. 2 months later, on March 22nd, the WWE Hall of Fame was formally established, and Andre was the sole inductee. 22 years ago this week, on January 25th, 1999, on Monday Night Raw, which beat out WCW Monday Nitro in the Nielsen ratings that night 5.5 to 5.0, a combined rating of over 10 for pro wrestling on a Monday night. Just 24 hours removed from the Royal Rumble and his big win, Vince McMahon claimed that his own corporate champion, The Rock, woke up in a cold sweat not wanting to face him for the WWF title at WrestleMania. But he says he has nothing to fear because he is forfeiting his shot as the number one contender to allow The Rock to pick his own opponent at WrestleMania. That is, until Stone Cold Steve Austin shows up on the Titantron. And where is he? He's not there. He's not in the back. He is at the home of Shawn Michaels, the then WWE commissioner, Shawn Michaels, who informs Vince McMahon that per the WWE rulebook, which I'm still waiting to see, I'd love to buy a copy, if the winner of the Royal Rumble is unable or unwilling to compete in the main event of WrestleMania, the runner-up of the Rumble gets to take that person's spot. And that person just so happens to be Stone Cold Steve Austin. And Austin says that, look, I'm willing to put my title shot on the line if Vince McMahon agrees to face me in a match at St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and let's do it inside of a steel cage. And he goads Vince into agreeing to the match. This made the Royal Rumble match that year just feel completely pointless. But that is how they got to the big Austin McMahon match. Now, later that same night, The Rock retained the WWF title over Triple H in an I Quit match. When Kane was threatening to chokeslam Chyna, Triple H reluctantly said, "I quit," to stop him from doing it. And how does Chyna repay this great act of heroism by Triple H? By giving him a nut shot, turning on DX, and joining the corporation. Just a few short days later, the Denver Broncos played the Atlanta Falcons in Super Bowl 33, the first and only year to date that WWE has ever paid for a Super Bowl ad, which ended with someone being tossed out a window at Titan Tower. The average cost of a 30-second Super Bowl ad that year, just a cool $1.6 million. What do you guys think? I think we can crowdfund one, right? We come together, we up the super chats on some of the YouTube streams. I think we can help WWE produce another Super Bowl ad. But that wasn't the only WWE tie-in with that year's Super Bowl. They also taped an empty arena WWE title match to air on USA Network during halftime of the big game on a special called Halftime Heat, which was taped on January 26th before fans were let into the building that night for the Raw taping. An empty arena match between Mankind and The Rock. Vince McMahon returned to commentary for the match, which is a lot of fun to go back and watch. I did watch it recently. They brawled all over the building. Rock was providing commentary as he was kicking this guy's ass. And it ended with Foley parking a pallet, a wooden pallet with the assistance of a forklift, right across The Rock's chest, so he couldn't move, couldn't kick out. And that is how Mankind regained the WWF title. That one 20-minute segment drew a 6.6 rating and a 9.3 share on USA, making it the highest rated WWE show on USA in 11 years. 21 years ago this week, on the January 26th, 2000 episode of WCW Thunder, Kevin Nash made himself the WCW champion. So a little bit of background on this. This was about a month after Bret Hart sustained what would end up being a career-ending series. It really was a series. It wasn't just one concussion. Series of concussions, didn't know he had them, kept working, just made it worse. So Bret was forced to surrender the WCW title, which led to a match at their sold-out pay-per-view, where Chris Benoit beat Sid Vicious. Now, they knew Benoit was on his way out, and putting the title on him was sort of Kevin Sullivan's last-ditch effort to convince him to stay, but Benoit was not a mark for the fucking belt, and so he left anyway, which left them without a champion again. Kevin Nash was the commissioner at the time. I don't remember how or why he ended up the commissioner, nor is it important, but he announced that he would be wrestling Sid for the title, provided that Sid could first beat the Harris brothers. Good old Ron and Don. He could beat the Harris brothers, which Sid did, and then he later went on to beat Nash and win the WCW title. 48 hours later, here on Thunder, Commissioner Nash informed Sid that he had pinned the wrong Harris brother on Nitro, nullifying his victory and vacating the WCW title for the third time in a matter of days. But then he declared himself the new WCW champion. And he announced that his first defense would take place later in the show in a handicap steel cage match with Sid challenging Nash and one of the Harris brothers. I assume it was the legal one from Nitro that Sid never beat. Sid did beat Nash to win the title back at the end of the show, and Sid reigned as WCW champion for the next 3 months until, you guessed it, the title was vacated when Vince Russo and Eric Bischoff declared all the titles vacant and rebooted the product. So long before Vacant went on to claim his numerous championships in WWE, he had a Hall of Fame career in WCW. There would be a total of 19 WCW world title changes in the company's final full year in operation. January 31st, 2000, the Radicalz arrive on Raw is War. Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Perry Saturn, and Dean Malenko all jump ship together from WCW. They had their issues with Kevin Sullivan being WCW head booker, especially Benoit. I mean, the man took his wife, so obviously there were going to be some personal issues there over the years. Kevin Sullivan booked his own divorce and didn't even know he was doing it. Sullivan put the WCW title on Benoit the night before to try to get him to stay, but to no avail. Then Mike Graham, who was working as a producer behind the scenes at the time, threatened to cut them with a knife. I don't mean cut them like fire them, because he didn't have that power anyway. I'm talking literally cut them. After being told, I don't know who told him this, somebody informed him that in their meeting with WCW head Bill Bush, maybe it was Bill Bush who told him, that they had supposedly asked for Sullivan, Graham, and J.J. Dillon all to be fired. At that point, you now have a WCW executive threatening assault with a deadly weapon. That's not good. You pretty much have to let them out of their contracts, which is what they did. And there they were, sitting in the front row during a New Age Outlaws match on Raw to open the show. They got involved, they laid out the Outlaws, and Benoit and Guerrero went on to be very successful, but tragic stories in WWE. But what a coup for the company, having two of the best wrestlers on the planet basically fall into your lap at the same time. And that's not to take anything away from Saturn. Dean Malenko was a very good wrestler. Dean Malenko is not going to be mistaken as being one of the potentially biggest stars in wrestling, or one of the top 3 or 5 best wrestlers in the business at that time. Benoit and Eddie had all the potential in the world, and to be able to almost steal them away from WCW in their prime at the same time, that was a very big pickup for WWE. 17 years ago this week, on January 25th, 2004, in his very first Royal Rumble match, Chris Benoit went the distance, becoming only the second man in history to win from the number 1 spot. He would then leave SmackDown for Raw and would challenge not for the WWE Championship, but for the World Heavyweight title at WrestleMania 20. Now, had he stayed on SmackDown, assuming that Eddie Guerrero still beats Brock Lesnar at No Way Out, we could have had Benoit against Guerrero at Madison Square Garden for one of the main events, if not the main event, for the WWE title at WrestleMania that year. Bob Holly on this show got a rare WWE title match against Brock Lesnar, the man who dropped him on his head in a match on SmackDown and broke his neck a couple of years earlier. In his book, Holly writes that they were scheduled to go 15 minutes, including entrances, but when they got to the gorilla position right before, he was told their time was being cut in half, and now they only had 8 minutes, including entrances, which cut out a lot of what they had planned. The reason? Because Shawn Michaels and Triple H wanted more time for their last man standing match, which is where those extra 7 or 8 minutes ended up going. 16 years ago this week, on January 30th, 2005, one of the most memorable botches in WWE history, as Batista won the Royal Rumble match, eliminating John Cena, but only after the two men fell out of the ring at the same time. Not only did they fall out of the ring at the same time, They hit the floor at the exact same time. They did a much better job of hitting the floor simultaneously than Bret Hart and Lex Luger did in '94, and that was planned. This was not. Batista was supposed to hold on to the ropes, and only Cena was supposed to hit the floor. Instead, Batista fell out with him. He was going for a Batista bomb. He fell backwards. Somehow he tumbled out of the ring and really smacked the floor pretty hard, went splat. You could not have timed it. If they tried, they could not have timed it any better. And so now panic is setting in the back. People are like, what the fuck? That's not what was supposed to happen. One referee raised Batista's hand because they knew Batista was supposed to be the winner of the match. Batista, I think at the time, was a Raw star, so I think one of the Raw referees held his hand up. And all of a sudden, the SmackDown referees, maybe all the referees, but they're getting an instruction in their IFB, in their earpiece from the back, telling them they hit at the same time. One of the SmackDown refs, go over and raise John Cena's hand. And while they're trying to, there's confusion, they're trying to figure out where Eric Bischoff and Teddy Long are. They're the general managers of Raw and SmackDown at that time. So the idea was, let's get the GMs, let's send them out there. They'll add to the confusion. They'll, dispute who won and who didn't, just to kind of stall and buy time and try to figure out how to get this thing restarted and what to do. The only problem is nobody could find either one of them because they left the building. They didn't think they were needed, and so they were gone. Nobody could find Bischoff or Teddy Long, hence why Vince McMahon, part of the reason why Vince McMahon was so pissed. He was probably sitting there going, God damn it. Sometimes you got to do things by yourself. You got to do it yourself. So he got up from his seat and he stormed out. I'm sure he was exaggerating to a degree because he was being Mr. McMahon, but by all accounts from the people who were there that night, he was legitimately very upset. And so he storms down to the ring and he goes to slide in. All right, he throws his suit jacket down and he goes to slide into the ring, but when he does so, he hits his knees on the apron. His knees smack the apron. When he goes to stand up, he can't. He collapses. He collapses because he tore his quad. And it makes sense, if you've got no quad, or only one, it's going to be hard to stand up straight. And he fell down on his ass. And there he is. He's just sitting there. It looks very bizarre. Nobody knows why he is sitting. Everybody else in the ring is standing. All the referees are standing. Batista's standing. John Cena's standing. Vince McMahon is taking a load off. He's sitting against the ropes. They're all pleading their case about why this guy won. No, this guy won. Meanwhile, you gotta think, he's totally no-selling it, but you gotta think as Vince McMahon is sitting there, he doesn't give a shit about what anybody is saying. His leg has gotta be on fire. But he'll no-sell it. He'll no-sell it. Can't show weakness. So what ends up happening is they restart the match. And about a minute later, Batista tosses out John Cena for the win. So finally, for real this time, Batista wins the Royal Rumble. And Vince McMahon is refusing all help as he is making his way to the back. He doesn't want anybody's help. He doesn't want anybody to bring him a wheelchair or crutches or anything. He's going to walk to the back because it's the macho thing. He doesn't want to look weak. I can do it myself. I don't need anybody else's help. Right? Those are the two things with him. You can't sneeze around him and you can't look weak. And Bruce Pritchard is, he was working in the back that night, and he recalls hearing the loudest scream, I presume from Vince, that he ever heard from somewhere over by the loading dock area. Because I guess he was still refusing all help. There were people who wanted, him to take a seat or let us carry you, whatever. And Vince went, no. And he hears this loud shriek, this loud scream, which was the moment that Vince tore his other quad. Because he was probably putting so much pressure on the other leg. And look, he smacked both legs into the apron. So I wouldn't be shocked if that other quad was already half gone. And then by refusing help and trying to be all macho, he tore the other one. This is what he told the Wall Street Journal a few weeks later. Said, 7 weeks ago, I severed both of my quadriceps tendons doing a stunt in the ring. I wasn't warmed up. I didn't stretch. And that, unfortunately, is major surgery. For the record, his stunt was sliding into the ring. That was his big stunt. 13 years ago this week, on January 27, 2008, Solomonster attended the Royal Rumble at Madison Square Garden and watched, with my own 2 eyes, what it was like to see an entire crowd full of people, almost 20,000 people, deflate like a balloon when Randy Orton pinned Jeff Hardy to retain the WWE Championship. Jeff Hardy was the hottest thing in wrestling at that time. That's partly aided by the fact that John Cena had been out for a few months with an injury. But there was just something about Jeff Hardy at that time, late 07 into the beginning of 08, where he just caught fire. And if he wasn't the number 1 babyface in the company, he was number 2. And I can remember being in the building that night, and I was pulling for Jeff Hardy. I was like a lot of other people in the Garden that night, really pulling for him. It felt like this was going to be his night. This was the night to just put that championship on him for the first time. And not only did he lose, but it felt like it just sort of came out of nowhere. There was really almost like no build up to it. The match didn't go that long, as I recall. And so everybody, it was just this wave of disappointment when Orton hit the RKO and pinned him to retain the title. Turned out to be a blessing. After Jeff was suspended 60 days for a second wellness policy violation only a few weeks before WrestleMania that year. He was expected, I think, going into Mania to win the Money in the Bank ladder match. And then a few weeks before he got popped, and that second violation was 2 months. 2 months gone. Now imagine if he were WWE Champion going into WrestleMania. The 30-man Rumble opened with the same 2 men who closed out the previous year's match, The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels. And by the way, that 07 Rumble is, I would say, it's hard for me to sit here and say the best finish, because I don't want to, I mean, you guys know what I think is the best finish. I'm not even going to say it. But the 07 Rumble finish is absolutely in competition for one of the best Rumble finishes they've ever done. And maybe it is the best. I mean, it was really, really well done. I couldn't tell you anything else that happened in the 2007 Royal Rumble match other than Team Rated RKO being, knocked out of the ring by Shawn Michaels, and then it coming down to Shawn and Undertaker. And that was really the first in-ring interaction between them since Shawn had come back, since he had unretired in 2002. They really hadn't gotten physical, I don't think, at all, since, I guess, what would have been their casket match at the Rumble in 98. So that 07 Rumble finish was just fantastic. So here we are now a year later. They ended the previous year here. They open up the Rumble in 2008. Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, or should I say, the Heartbreak Kid, which is what Michael Buffer announced him as without ever actually calling him Shawn Michaels. He just said the Heartbreak Kid. He did a long, extended intro, and that was it. It's like he forgot to mention his real name. John Cena blew the roof off MSG, entering as a surprise in the number 30 spot until everybody realized, hey, we're supposed to hate this guy. And as soon as the music stopped and he got in the ring, they started booing. I've never seen that before. This guy got a superstar, just surprise, shock reaction when he came out. People were so happy to see him. Genuinely did not expect John Cena to come out. And then as soon as he hit the ring, it's like they just, like a light bulb went off and they remembered, we have to boo this guy. And the boos rained down on John Cena. Now, he was expected to be out about 8 months or more with a completely torn pec muscle, torn right off the bone, that he suffered in a match on Raw in October. It might have been the first day of October against Mr. Kennedy. But he made it back in just under 4 months with his mutant healing powers. And he dumped out Triple H to win the match. 12 years ago, on the January 27, 2009 episode of Larry King Live, Larry just passed away last week. He had Mickey Rourke on the show, the star of the movie The Wrestler. And he was up for an Oscar that year for Best Actor. He ended up losing to Sean Penn for his performance. I guess Sean Penn was in the movie Milk, which I never saw, so I can't comment on Sean Penn's performance. I can only tell you that without even seeing Sean Penn's performance, I think that Mickey Rourke got robbed because he did a fantastic job in The Wrestler. Larry also had Chris Jericho on the show from a different location to respond to Mickey after Mickey Rourke let it leak on the red carpet at the Screen Actors Guild Awards that he was going to kick Jericho's ass at Wrestlemania. The problem is, Vince McMahon had not yet clued in Jericho, or anybody else for that matter, about the fact that they were planning to bring in Mickey Rourke for a match at WrestleMania. He was trying to work on this deal very secretively. Mickey jumped the gun. They were supposed to wait until after the Oscars, and hopefully an Oscars win, to make the announcement. And once Mickey Rourke's people found out about what was going on, they were furious, and they wanted him to pull out for fear that it could cost him the Oscar. You know, like the Academy might frown upon him being involved in pro wrestling, which is comical given that he just is up for an award for playing a professional wrestler. But I guess they felt like if it got out, it would be beneath him. It could besmirch him in some way. So they were not happy at all about the reports and the news leaking that he either committed to or was thinking about doing a match at WrestleMania. And so the problem is they had already booked the appearance on Larry King Live. And Larry still wanted them both on. And Vince McMahon told Jericho, look, I want you to try to bait him. I want you to try to bait him into doing the match. That was his mission. Those were his marching orders in going on the show that night. Try to get him to commit to doing a match with you at WrestleMania. And Jericho was in full heel Jericho mode. He was in total character on the show that night, throwing insults at Mickey Rourke. I heard what you said about me. You offended me. I take offense to what you said. This is a totally different world, Rourke. You have no idea what you're talking about. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. You put your foot in your mouth. And to his credit, Mickey Rourke was being very apologetic. He admitted, I kind of put my foot in my mouth when I made that comment. And, he was backtracking. He was backtracking off of any kind of challenge. Taking the advice of his people. Because, look, Mickey Rourke here, he was on his best behavior. He was very polite. He was very respectful. He was very subdued during this segment, which was not the Mickey Rourke of old. Mickey Rourke had fallen off the face of the earth for many years. A lot of people may not know this. They may not remember this. Mickey Rourke at one time was an actor on the rise, right? You go back to I think late 80s, early 90s. Yeah, he was looked at as like a heartthrob, and he's one of the actors of the future, and he had been in a bunch of films, and he had this great career ahead of him, but he was his own worst enemy. He got this reputation as the Hollywood bad boy. And he ended up being one of those what-if stories in Hollywood. He blew up his own career, and he ruined his face. He ended up doing boxing and stuff, and his face got all mangled, which is why, if you look at pictures of what Mickey Rourke looked like 30 years ago compared to what Mickey Rourke looks like today, it just looks like almost two different people. So The Wrestler, this was the opportunity of a lifetime for him. This just sort of fell in his lap, and this represented the great comeback story for him. So he didn't want to do anything to fuck that up. So there was no Mickey Rourke match at WrestleMania, but he did still appear on the show, and he even threw a shot at Jericho after Jericho's match with all the legends. He ended up wrestling a bunch of legends that night. Ricky Steamboat. I think Jimmy Snuka was in there. Roddy Piper. I think they wanted Greg Valentine, and Jericho might have been the one who actually suggested Steamboat, who had this great, albeit brief, comeback. He looked great. Steamboat hadn't wrestled in a number of years. But before the show, So at WrestleMania, before the show, Mickey Rourke was hot. He was angry. He thought Chris Jericho talked down to him on Larry King for real. Like, that's who he really was. He wasn't just there to stir him up. He wasn't just there playing a part. He thought that all the stuff Jericho was saying was 100% legit, that he had disrespected him, he talked shit about him on television, and he was not happy. So he didn't really want to I don't know if he wanted to kick his ass or he just didn't want to have anything to do with him. But that's what he honestly felt like. And he even brought some backup with him. He brought backup with him in case Jericho tried anything. This is from Jericho's second book. After about a half an hour of going over the punch spot a dozen times, Mickey was happy and he left ringside and his posse was with him. So he left ringside with his posse in tow. I went over to Vince and I told him what had almost happened. Said, you know, Rourke hired those guys to kick my ass if I tried to double-cross him. Vince stared down the rampway at Rourke's gang and said, are you kidding me? Those guys? And he laughed. He motioned to Dean Malenko and Fit Finlay, who were talking at ringside, and Vince goes, you, me, Finlay, and Malenko would have beaten the shit out of them. I mean, look at that one guy. He's a midget. The midget that Vince was referring to was Frank Shamrock, the multiple-time UFC champion. That I smiled at Vince and said, well, if anything goes down, I'll take Rourke and you take the midget. And Vince said, damn right I will. And he swaggered away. I do love me a good Vince McMahon story. That's always been one of my favorites. That's always been one of my favorites. The night that Vince McMahon almost took that little midget named Frank Shamrock. Vince McMahon truly, you can say whatever you want about Vince McMahon. God knows a lot of people, myself included, have a lot of thoughts about him and everything, you know, with the product these days. But man, the guy is one of a kind. 8 years ago this week on January 27th, 2013, John Cena won his second Royal Rumble match, and The Rock defeated CM Punk to become WWE Champion over a decade removed from his last run with the title. After beating John Cena at WrestleMania the previous year, The Rock made it very clear that one day he would be WWE Champion again. And on Raw 1000, which was the very first full-time 3-hour episode of Raw, the beginning of Dark Days, Raw 1000, that July, the night that The Rock showed up was the night that CM Punk went heel, if you remember. And it all led to this match here with Punk defending the championship against The Rock. Punk won the match. Initially, CM Punk actually pinned The Rock with an assist from The Shield, who we didn't see. The lights went out, they went back on, The Rock was down. Obviously, it was The Shield because that was their MO at the time, and Vince McMahon had warned CM Punk, no Shield. If the Shield gets involved in this match, I will strip you of the WWE Championship. So out comes the chairman, and he's about to strip CM Punk of his title after this long reign that he's had with the title. And The Rock gets on the mic and he goes, no. We're not going to end like this. He goes, restart the match now. And so they ring the bell to restart the match, and 60 seconds later, CM Punk's 434-day run as WWE Champion came to an end. It was the longest run since Hulk Hogan dropped that same championship to Andre the Giant after 4 years. Hogan had about a 4.5 year run as the champion before he dropped it in 88. And Punk's run was the longest since that one. 7 years ago, on January 26th, 2014, marked one of the biggest creative blunders in WWE history. The fans had gotten behind Daniel Bryan in a way that a lot of people never expected. Clearly, the company never expected it to get to this point. And he had been consistently in storylines screwed over by the Authority ever since SummerSlam, right? The big twist with Triple H going heel and Randy Orton cashing in Money in the Bank. Bryan was very briefly WWE champion. Then he won the belt back. Then he got screwed again. Constantly, this guy was getting screwed over. Then he joined the Wyatt family, then he left the Wyatt family. He and Bray Wyatt had an excellent opener on this pay-per-view. Still the best singles match of Bray Wyatt's career. I don't know what that says about Bray Wyatt's singles career. It doesn't speak very highly, I don't think, but in my opinion, still the best singles match, not counting those Shield six-mans that he was part of. Best match of Bray's career. But what the fans really wanted to see was Daniel Bryan win the Royal Rumble match, which he had not previously been announced for. So he was not officially in the match, but people were hoping, I was hoping they would do the right thing, and they were saving him for this big dramatic moment. Maybe he would come out at number 30 or something. When I saw that he lost to Bray in the opener, I'm thinking, all right, well, this makes sense, right? You put Bray over. Bryan can lose because he's going to come back out later, and he's going to come out, and everyone's going to go crazy. He's out there at number 30. Everything was poised and set up for a big dramatic moment in the Rumble match. But people, they were hoping, even though nothing was officially announced, they were hoping. Now, a lot of times, as we all know, the fans can kind of, to steal a Hoganism, work themselves, the marks could work themselves into a shoot, right? What was the tweet again? The classic tweet, when you work a work and you work yourself into a shoot, marks, right? We're all guilty of it. We think something should happen. We think something might happen. We get ourselves all psyched up for it. I still fall guilty to the same thing. But the company never actually announced that it would happen, so it's not like false advertising or anything like that. But you kind of, you see where certain pieces might fit, and you get excited and you start to fantasy book in your own mind. And that's what a lot of people were doing at that time. There was one obstacle, though. There was one obstacle to Bryan entering the Rumble and punching his ticket to WrestleMania. Actually, two. One was Vince McMahon, but the other obstacle was Dave Batista, who was making his return to the company in the Royal Rumble match. This was Batista's return to the company after quitting 4 years earlier. WWE brought him back specifically to win the Royal Rumble and go on to challenge Randy Orton for the championship at WrestleMania 30 and beat him and win the title. That was the plan. That was the original plan. Now, I liked having Batista back. Even though I think, and he felt the same way, hindsight, of course. Although I think Batista actually felt that way even before, not just in hindsight, that he should have come back as a heel. Or even if he came back very initially as a babyface, he should have gone heel. Not have the fans turn him heel, but he should have been a heel. Batista's heel run in 2010 was so short, it was too short. It's like Hollywood Rock in 2003. It didn't last long enough. He was so great. He was so great. He was like a male diva in 2010. I remember that one promo on Raw he cut on John Cena before WrestleMania. I don't know what the fuck he was wearing. He looked like something out of the Village People. He was talking about John Cena kissing fat people and babies or fat babies. I remember all the verbiage. He goes, while you're doing that, I'm at the gym working out. Like, he was just on point. And I kind of missed that Batista. It would have been nice to have that Batista back. So I liked having him back. It was just a place of the right place, wrong time. And as a result of WWE's inept booking, a lot of people suffered for their sins, not just Batista. John Cena and Randy Orton, they had a match at this pay-per-view. That match was plagued by chants of Daniel Bryan and fans revolting against the match. Although the fact that it was their 9th singles match on pay-per-view against one another may have also had something to do with that. People were just sick and tired of seeing John Cena against Randy Orton. In the Rumble itself, Batista came out, he was booed. And so was poor Rey Mysterio, who entered at number 30. And once the people realized, oh shit, that's it. There ain't nobody else coming out. Rey Mysterio is number 30 and not Daniel Bryan. Well, they turned on this match. They turned on poor Rey Mysterio, who didn't do anything wrong. Just like Batista, he didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't their fault. But once the people realized that meant no Daniel Bryan, they completely shit on this match. Funny enough, the one guy they started to get behind at the very end, because he was a new guy and it was like anybody but Batista. Roman Reigns, still a member of the Shield at the time. We all know what would happen with Roman 1 year later. People were cheering and chanting for Roman. They were hoping Roman would win. But it was not meant to be. He went out. Batista won the match. Hence his new phrase, deal with it. People didn't like that. And Batista won the Royal Rumble. It was a big mistake on WWE's part, bringing him back as a babyface at a time when Daniel Bryan was as hot as he was, and thinking that it wouldn't blow up in their faces. How could they not see that it was going to blow up in their faces? I know Batista was very disappointed. He does not look back fondly on that return and how things played out, and he agrees that he should have come back as a heel. Now, that Rumble also marks CM Punk's final WWE match. He worked the match with a staph infection and a concussion, or what he believes was a concussion, that he suffered during the Rumble from a Kofi Kingston clothesline. Before Raw the next night, he met with Vince McMahon and Triple H, and he aired his grievances. This was his Festivus. He let them know about all the problems they had. He even told Triple H at one point, I resent you not putting me over. When they had their little program back in 2011, he let it all out in that meeting because the plan had been for Triple H and Punk to meet again. They were going to meet at WrestleMania. Punk was beat up, he was sore, he was sick, he was hurt, he was done. He was burned out. He was finished. And it was going to be him and Triple H in Mania, Batista against Randy Orton. By Punk walking out when he did, it resulted in the WrestleMania card being reworked with Daniel Bryan, who by his own admission in his own book was scheduled 6th from the top at WrestleMania that year. Not main event, not sub-main event, not anywhere near the main event. They may well have opened the show like they did at WrestleMania a few years prior. 6th from the top in a random match against Sheamus. That was the original plan for Daniel Bryan that year at WrestleMania. It has now been 7 years since Punk walked out, and in celebration of his anniversary, he posted on Instagram, "Happy anniversary to me. Remember, if it costs you your peace, it's too expensive." The following year, on January 25th, 2015, we were treated to one of the worst Royal Rumbles ever produced, if not the worst. If it's not the worst, it's top 3. Worst Rumble match in history. On the same night that we were treated to one of the greatest championship matches in Royal Rumble history, in a triple threat match for the WWE title, Brock Lesnar, John Cena, and Seth Rollins. Things again, 1 year later, centered around Daniel Bryan. He was out for much of 2014 after his big win at WrestleMania. He had a serious neck injury. He announced his return, I think in December. He came back. He announced that he was not only coming back, he entered himself into the Royal Rumble match, which was a very big mistake. If he was not going to win the Rumble, that was a big, big mistake. The best thing they could have done, because I don't even know that people knew for sure when or even if Bryan was going to be back. I think people sort of accepted, okay, he's out, he's got a bad neck, he may or may not come back, we don't know when. It's not like the people, oh, we had to bring Daniel Bryan back because people are just hijacking the shows. The right move for them to make if he wasn't going to win would have been to just keep him out until after the Rumble. And the night after the Rumble, you can have him come out on Raw and make his grand return and talk about, his journey back to WrestleMania or something like that. This was the worst thing that they could have done. And what made this so awful wasn't even so much the fact that Bryan was eliminated, but it was the way in which he was eliminated. Early, after just 10 minutes in the match, very unceremoniously dumped out of the ring like a random scrub. There was no drama behind it. There was no story behind it. It might have been Bray who just, Bryan was on the apron and Bray just sort of ran over and just like knocked him off. And he fell to the floor and that was it. And how poetic, right? You remember the shot of who came out next? It was Goldust, and you have the shot. Daniel Bryan he's sitting there outside the ring at the foot of the aisleway with this unbelievably disappointed look on his face. And then in the background, you see the Titantron for Goldust. And what does it say on the screen? Shattered Dreams. Shattered Dreams Productions. I don't know if that was intended that way or not, but if not, whoo boy, you could not have found a more poetic shot than that. Shattered dreams indeed. Now, the company knew, okay, we're probably going to get backlash. When Bryan goes out, they're not going to be happy. They're going to boo. They're going to throw a hissy fit. The idea, apparently, was we'll get rid of him early. And let's let all the fans just get it all out, right? All the chants and all the boos. Let them get it out of their system. So that by the time Roman Reigns got his big win at the end of the match, it would have been over and done with. Well, it didn't quite work out that way. When Bryan went out, they started shitting on everything. Everyone, everything. And they never stopped. It only got worse as the match went on. People were pissed. And what made it even worse was towards the end, watching Kane and Big Show, the Authority's henchmen, one by one, tossing out every single babyface, every single person. Not even babyface, just every single person that the crowd, even remotely at that time, cared about. Dean Ambrose, gone. Dolph Ziggler, gone. Bray Wyatt, gone. And Roman Reigns was left to bear the brunt of the backlash through no fault of his own. Same thing with Batista the year before. Not even their fault. They get shit on, it's not even their fault. Even The Rock was taken aback by the reaction. He made a cameo after that match that night in Philadelphia, and he raised Roman Reigns' arm. He raised his cousin's arm in victory when the match was over, and still they booed. They booed The Rock. Now you know you've pissed off the fans when you boo The Rock, when he is most definitely not trying to be booed. But there's an expression that it reminds me of. It's called reading the room. WWE did a poor job of reading the room that night in Philadelphia. But this was also the night that the canceled WWE Network hashtag started trending worldwide, caused the WWE Network cancellation page to crash due to all of the overwhelming traffic. Some fans even took to blocking some of the wrestlers who were trying to leave the parking lot when the show was over, which is just ridiculous. As if it were their fault. And look, even if it was, it's a wrestling show, you morons. Don't do that. Don't be like those idiots. Even Mother Nature reacted negatively to the result of the Rumble. Raw the next night was canceled due to a major snowstorm that hit the East Coast, which forced them to do an impromptu episode from Titan Tower, filled with sit-down promos and replays of stuff. I think they replayed that great title match from the night before. But it did give us our first glimpse into Paul Heyman's love for his current tribal chief, when he professed his respect and admiration for Roman Reigns and his Samoan lineage in beginning the promotion, I guess, for the big Roman Reigns-Brock Lesnar match that year at WrestleMania. That's why I say, whether it happens at WrestleMania 37 this year or not, or it happens at a later pay-per-view, there is a history there that they can easily tap into if they want to do a Daniel Bryan Roman Reigns match. It's there for the taking. 10 years ago this week, on January 30th, 2011, Alberto Del Dipshit won the biggest Royal Rumble in history with 40 men instead of the usual 30. Biggest, but only barely the longest. It beat out the 2002 Royal Rumble match by just 27 seconds. The match also featured two surprise returns, one from Booker T, who had turned down a new deal with TNA, and one from Kevin Nash in his diesel gear for the first time since 1996. He did re-sign with TNA. And then he had to sweet-talk Dixie Carter out of that new contract. I don't know what he told her, but apparently he got Dixie Carter to see things his way. He's got that. He turns that charm on, man, I'm telling you. He turns that charm on, and he got his release, and he was able to come back. This was the night that Matt Striker said he was marking out on commentary for Booker T, and he marked himself right out of a job. He marked himself right out of his announce gig. Ironically, who was he replaced by the following, I was going to say a week later. It wasn't even a week. It was that Tuesday at the SmackDown tapings. Who was the one who replaced Matt Striker on commentary? Booker T. I wonder if he marked out when he got the news that Booker was the one who was replacing him. 2 years ago this week, on January 29th, 2019, WWE announced that Jonathan Good, aka Dean Ambrose, would not be renewing his WWE contract when it expired that April, which was a very strange thing for them to do. Usually they'll throw contract offers at people right up until the 11th hour, but Ambrose made it very clear to them it wasn't about the money. He was burned out and fed up with the company, and he was done. He wanted out. The segment on Raw where he got vaccinated, he had to go to the doctor and get his shots to vaccinate and inoculate him from all of the nasty fans. He says that's the segment that really just pushed him over the edge, and he knew, I got to get the hell out of there. This sucks. This was the WWE statement on their website. We are grateful and appreciative for all that Dean has given to WWE and our fans. We wish him well and hope that one day Dean will return to WWE. He kept his mouth shut. He showed up for work every day until he was done, until the very last day of his contract. Never tipped his hat about what his next move would be. In fact, the same day that he informed the company that he was leaving, they had him taking bumps from Nia Jax on Monday Night Raw. Vince McMahon was said to be of the belief that he would take 6 months off or however many months off, and he would come right back to the company. Maybe he was just burned out and needed a vacation. Needed to go clear his head, get off the road for a little bit, but he'll be back. Instead, he showed up at AEW's Double or Nothing show in Las Vegas in May. I think that was just weeks after his contract expired. And less than a year later, he would be the AEW champion. And 1 year ago, on January 26th, 2020, a somber day, 9 people perished in a helicopter crash in California, including NBA legend Kobe Bryant and his daughter Gianna. Later that night, Edge made his return to the ring in the Royal Rumble match, coming out of retirement after 9 years out of the ring. And he looked good. He was working with Randy Orton in there. We had a little team-rated RKO reunion going on. AJ Styles sold the shit out of one of Edge's spears. Unfortunately, he sold a little too well, landed on his shoulder, separated his shoulder, was out of action for a few weeks. This Rumble match last year was the Brock Lesnar show. WWE Champion entering the Rumble, something that we don't normally see. I maintain that I think the 2020 Royal Rumble match is one of the better Rumble matches that this company has ever done. And where it falls in my top 10, I'd have to think about that. But I think it's pretty high up there. Last year's Rumble was a very good match. Even though Brock was tossing guys left and right early on, he was the dominant monster in there for a while. I love the story of him being in there. And every time somebody would come out, he would have a different reaction. Shelton Benjamin came out, they used to be best friends and roommates in college. And he was pretending to be his friend until he wasn't, and then he dumped him out. The look on his face when Keith Lee came out was just priceless. Drew McIntyre, when he finally kicked him, Claymore kicked him right out of the ring. And they panned back and they showed you that big stadium, everybody losing their minds. It was such a great moment. I think in a lot of ways, that really was Drew McIntyre's Wrestlemania. Being in that big stadium like that, getting that kind of reaction. And then again at the end of the match when he eliminated Roman Reigns, won the Rumble. It's a very good Rumble match. We've had some stinkers in the last 5 or 10 years. 2014, 2015, I would not voluntarily go back and watch those. 2016, I think, was actually a pretty good one. 2018, I remember being pretty good. The last few years actually has not been bad. But that 2020 Rumble match is definitely one of the better ones they've ever done. And that is this week in wrestling history. Hope you enjoyed your weekly trip down memory lane. I think we're done with all the Rumble stuff now. This is a very busy Rumble month. A lot of Rumbles, a lot of history, a lot of big things going on in the month of January. It's probably only going to get bigger because we're heading into WrestleMania season. And not only are we heading into WrestleMania season, but this is 20 years since the death of ECW, the death of WCW. So there's going to be a lot of anniversaries coming up. There's going to be a lot of history this year to get through. And I hope you guys are enjoying all of the segments, because we got a lot more where that came from.